You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. We are joined today by one of the nation's most cogent, articulate, historically grounded, and philosophically compelling writers and speakers who is in high demand everywhere. And it is a joy and a privilege to have with us now Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. He is a distinguished professor with affiliations current and past that include the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, Hillsdale College, California State University, and U.S. Naval Academy. He has won numerous academic prizes as a historian, a classicist, an inspired writer, teacher, and fellow. Dr. Victor Davis Hanson served as a presidential appointee on the Battle Monuments Commission, has been a board member of the Guggenheim Foundation, and currently serves on the Bradley Foundation board. And he has written some 24 books to date, digging deep into history and explaining its relevance. Many of his books are, if not legendary, very widely read and continue to shape this country's thinking, helping inform and guide conservatives' thoughts and actions. You are a real national treasure, and we are just honored to have you with us today. A warm welcome, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's wonderful. Dr. Hanson, you are such a unique force in our society today, and a speaker of truth with a depth of understanding, not only about recent history, but ancient history, and not only about governments, but about cultures. You are a penetrating observer about our own culture and what we are going through. And so I have literally like 100 questions that came to mind when I was thinking of this interview, but let me just start with one or two right here. With all that you know and have to offer, can I ask you something very basic? And
Yes.
I think you've recently written and spoke about it, and that is the demise of citizenship. You have recently written and spoken eloquently about the idea of the dying citizen. And I wondered if you could help our more than 2 million AMAC members sort of ponder more deeply around that idea and what that really means.
Yeah, I have a book, The Dying Citizen, that came out 3 weeks ago, so it's kind of a fresh topic for me. I think when we look at all of this confusion in our landscape today, whether it's 2 million people are crashing the border with impunity and the law doesn't seem to be enforced, or it's this return to pre-civilizational tribalism where everybody seems to want to identify by their superficial appearance rather than a common American identity, or we're worried about our children with this shrinking middle class. Wages seem to be, even when they grow, they don't grow as fast as the rate of inflation. Fuel costs are up, housing is up. Students today are encumbered by $1.7 trillion in student debt. And the age when people get married and when they have their first child and when they buy their first home, if they do that at all, have gone up by about 5 years in the last 30 years. Half the country dies with less than $10,000 in net worth. And so the traditionally ingredients of citizenship address all that. If you have an empowered, autonomous, self-reliant citizenry, and you have secure borders to inculcate civic identity, traditions, everything from the 4th of July to knowledge of the Battle of Gettysburg or what happened at Normandy, or you say that how you look is incidental to who you are, not essential, then you have an empowered, active citizenship. And then people in the elite that exercise power sometimes without the consent of the governed. And I'm thinking about the recent controversies we've had, IRS, Lois Lerner, CIA, John Brennan, NSA, James Clapper, FBI, James Comey, and Andrew McCabe. I could go on, but we have Anthony Fauci, very controversial as the director, National Institute of Allergies and Health, but they all have one thing in common. As this government grows and the middle class and people within an idea of the United States are unsure of themselves and they're starting to re-tribalize, that is, they're going backward in time to have affinities that are superficial, not meritocratic, then these other people fill that vacuum of the citizens. So we are having people who are not audited, They're not held accountable. They say things under oath that are not true. I don't want to get into all the personalities, but the names I just mentioned have all testified in Congress and have admitted or almost admitted that they told an untruth. And I could go into General Milley and I could go with all of them, but we were creating these vast amounts of 2 million people in the federal government that act as judge, jury, and executioner in the way they treat citizens. If you get audited, if somebody surveils you, you don't have the mechanism to say that's not right, that you broke the law. How dare you do that? The same thing as we have evolutionaries, and these are people who feel that maybe their political agendas were not met or their dreams were not realized, so the system is at fault, even in its 233rd year. And so now we are hearing, given the convulsions of 2020 and 21 plague, the quarantine, recession, George Floyd, 120 days of rioting, the election, the controversy around Trump, they feel that it's time now, because human nature, according to them, changes, to change this Constitution, or at least the traditions that surround it and the customs that we are here to. 150 years of a 9-person Supreme Court. If you don't like the rulings, throw it out, pack it. 180 years of the filibuster. If it doesn't work for you this time around in the Senate, get rid of it. 233 years of the Electoral College. We don't like it anymore. It doesn't give us the predetermined result. 60 years of 50 states. No, we don't have enough senators. Let's bring in Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. 233 years of the Constitution saying that the individual states in national elections have the primary responsibility to set balloting laws within their jurisdiction. No, not fair. Let's federalize it. So these are evolutionaries, and they're very hard at work. The other final threat to citizenship, which I think is its decline and deterioration, is why we have this chaos, is we have a lot of people on the coast, not everybody, but from say Boston to Washington and Seattle, La Jolla, that they're developing a different global culture, the blue strips. And that is, when globalization hit, they had skills. I'm one of them. I work at Stanford University, media, insurance, law, corporations, universities, technology. They had suddenly a 7 billion person market. So we saw degrees of wealth in Silicon Valley, to take one example, $5 trillion of market capitalization. And they loved globalization. The people whose labor or work could be Xeroxed, outsourced, offshore, assembly, manufacturing, small lumberjacks, small farmers, any mineral, natural resource or labor that could be sent to Mexico or South America or Southeast Asia or China, it was so. And so we divided the country between so-called winners and losers, and that divide is growing. But my point is that then we did something very incredible. These people who were very successful in globalizing the economy thought, well, fashion is now globalized. People are wearing Levi's in Bolivia. They have flip-flops in Vietnam. We can communicate globally. You can get on a cell phone and call somebody in Uganda in a second. So let's have a political harmony. Let's ask the UN to come in and adjudicate whether we're racist, according to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Or let's have the International Criminal Court determine whether a captain in Afghanistan should have ordered that artillery strike or not. Or let's bypass the Senate, and we have to join the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran deal, even though they're treaties, but that's ossified. Why don't we just join the international consensus? And so we've made this mistake that we've confused cultural and economic globalization with this fallacy that the countries in the world are like us. But of the 190 nations, less than 50% are democratic. And when you look at that 50% and see if they actually have a Bill of Rights, they don't, except for about 25 countries. And so why in the world would you surrender sovereignty to the consensus and yet that's what we're seeing almost every day. Klaus Schwab at the Great Reset Project at Davos says that all the countries in the world need to get together and set international income tax rates on corporations so that nobody can offer them a discount. We have to institutionalize diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria in corporations worldwide. We have to have a Green New Deal. And these are all imposed from people that are not products of this unique system. So in conclusion, this chaos, whether it's the inflation or whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's the border, there has to be some common explanation. And I think what's happened is on the bottom, we've had these pre-civilizational forces of tribalism and open borders and destruction of the middle class. And then on the top, we've had evolutionaries that want to change it. We've had this administrative, huge, unelected state. We've had the force of globalization, and the citizen was caught in the middle. And you can see they're fighting back, but very tentatively. I mean, they're trying to fight the school boards about critical racial theory, or some pilots who've had COVID don't think they need to be vaccinated as well. So there's outbreaks of citizens that say, I can't do this anymore. I have to assert that I'm an autonomous American citizen. That why are you saying that if I've had COVID and I'm in the military, I have to be vaccinated when we're bringing in 2 million people this year across the border, and you're not asking of a non-citizen what you're asking of me, a citizen?
Wow, that's really fascinating to think of it that way, because I don't think that we usually pause to think about it that way. So thank you. I do want to move to something related, I think a related topic, and that is the idea of federal dependence, the idea that we're living through a time of not only this materialism and prolonged adolescence, as you say, but a kind of unwillingness to step up to responsibilities, and a conscious movement toward dependency on a growing, already enormous federal government. Help us, if you could, to understand where we are and how dangerous the idea of prolonged national adolescence, federal dependence, almost what I call like a cradle to grave dependence on the government. And that really takes us away from individual responsibility. Share with us the danger to our society.
We can look at it a number of ways, but one is the philosophical tradition. So when a democracy was discovered, or republican government in Rome, democracy in Athens, 2,500 years ago, people immediately worried that if you're allowing the majority of citizens to set revenues and budgets, they're always going to want the stuff for themselves and want somebody else to pay for it. So that was something that was the contradictions in our system from the beginning. And that's been a motif. And now we are $30 trillion in debt. And when people say we have to balance the budget, or we have to trim this entitlement or that entitlement, people say, you're heartless, you're racist, you're xenophobic, you're a protectionist, you're a nativist, you're a misanthrope, you're a misogynist. So it's very hard for a politician, given the majority wants stuff from the government. And once you start to give somebody things from the government, it's never going to be enough. And so by this, I mean, Donald Trump ran up a $1.7 trillion annual deficit during the COVID year. Joe Biden is going to go almost match that. But in addition, he wants another 3.5 trillion, and that's all borrowed money. And he says it's not an expense. So how do you pay for it? You always say, we're going to go after somebody else and get that money. And the result of it is on the ground level, we have people who can get $600, say, a week here in California still. And we have 7 million people who are not in the workforce and not looking for a job, who were in the workforce in 2020. And that's just about the amount of people that economists say are needed right now to keep ships at the port of Los Angeles in a steady flow of docking, unloading, and going back to sea. They're stacked up. Or when you drive America's freeways today, or go to their airports, or you talk to people, you see signs everywhere: help wanted, now hiring. In other words, this old idea that the government is just incidental and it's there for your support in times of emergency it's a central part of your life, and it's determining supply and demand and labor pool. So a person says to themselves, I'm going to stay home and I don't want to get COVID. I'll just stay home and I can live here in my basement, and I don't really care if my countrymen need me to produce oil or shop or drive a truck. I'm not going to do it because it makes no sense economically. When I go out and work and pay the taxes, I might as well stay home and get free cash. that's one incentive. The other is that, as you saw during the debate a decade ago over Obamacare, what was the advertisement strategy used by the Obama administration? They ran two videos. I think your listeners might remember them. One was Life of Julia, and it said, with Obamacare, we finalized the perfect life. And Julia came on, and it was a cartoon character, and said as soon as she was born, she was put in a Head Start program. And then she went into a Department of Education planned kindergarten. And then it went through all the entitlements she had through college, high school. Then she got federal loans. Then she worked for the government. Then she didn't need to get married, because why get married? Because the government has taken the place of your spouse. And then she had a child out of wedlock, and she was a single mom. And then the government came. And then we went into our retirement years. You really didn't have to worry about saving or 401ks or postponing immediate gratification. So in your golden years, you'd have money. The government would take care of it. And this was something that they were offering as an ideal. And then the other commercial was, I think everybody remembers the Pajama Boy one, where there was this young man in pajamas with little footsies on. He was about 22, and he was drinking hot chocolate. And, obviously in mid-morning or at noon. I mean, think of that, a person in their 20s. In the old days, he'd be on a covered wagon trying to explore, or he would be building his own home, or we'd have 3 kids, or he would be in the army, something. But here he is in his pajamas like a child, and he's drinking hot chocolate. And he's saying, I drank hot chocolate, support Obamacare. And so the ad campaign, I know it came from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but the most important thing is they had very sophisticated marketeers, and they knew that there must have been a constituency for those types of ads. And so nobody is saying on the other side, here's Bill Smith and Jill Smith, and they're standing out in front of their home that they bought when they were 23, and they have 2 children, and they're working 2 jobs, and they're completely independent, they feel, of government as much as possible. They participate in their church, their community. That's not the model that the other side wants. They want a dependency, cultural, economic, social, political, upon the government. And then they want a group of technocrats, intellectuals, academics, activists to be at the top. And they're going to tell us how this thing's going to run. And they're never going to be subject, as we know from totalitarian systems, they're never subject to any consequences that might affect their own lifestyles. If we see the most vocal advocates of progressive statism, where you go look where Mark Zuckerberg lives, to take one example, or the people politicians who fly on private jets that are advocates of the new Green Deal, they feel that they have to have exemptions because they're morally superior to the rest of the country.
Interesting, really is. And you certainly are alluding to issues that we're seeing in the Biden White House. I'm curious if you could give us an assessment of what you saw when you witnessed our catastrophic and bungled, tragic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then reaching maybe a little bit more broadly, what do you see in this White House with this president? I think too many Americans see what we're calling a crazy set of objectives. I mean, open borders, total loss of respect for police and law and order, excessive spending. So beginning with Afghanistan and your thoughts on the Biden White House, if you could share with us from your perspective.
Well, very quickly, Joe Biden ran a 19th century campaign. He was like William McKinley. He stayed home. He didn't campaign. We haven't seen that in a century. And the premise was that a very hard left group of progressives, AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, would not appeal to the majority of Americans. And they were not going to win that election. So the Democratic apparatus said, okay, Pete Buttigieg drop out, Elizabeth Warren drop out, you all drop out, and we'll support good old Joe Biden from Scranton, who's a moderate. But Joe Biden had cognitive issues. Everybody understood that. It was tragic. He was at 77, 70. He was not up to the rigors of a campaign. So he stayed in isolation. outsource the campaign to Donald Trump's tweets. Donald Trump is abrasive, the COVID, all of the tumult of 2020. And he agreed. He said, I will carry you guys across the finish line if you support me. Do not walk out on the Democrats, because Bernie Sanders could have stopped him if the hard left wing had not participated. So they made a devil's bargain. Joe Biden became president. AOC, Elizabeth Warren, the hard leftists of Sanders Incorporated said, this is the agenda. And the problem with the agenda was that no one in their right mind would ever have supported it, because it doesn't make sense. It's nihilistic. You can't open the border and let 2 million people in, and that's what's scheduled to arrive, without any idea whether they're vaccinated. It's in the time of a pandemic. Do they know the language? Do they know our culture? And what are we going to tell legal immigrants that are waiting in India and South Korea for years? Just, break the law. And then what do you tell somebody who gets a ticket, who went through a yellow light? You have to follow the law because you're a citizen, but not these people. They can break the law. So that wasn't going to poll well. Afghanistan, most people said, well, after 20 years, let's have a small presence. We've just spent $300 million at Bagram Air Base. We got $80 billion in equipment there. We've got $1 billion new embassy. It's a good base. Let's just control the area with a very small 3,000 person contingent, one of our 150 bases. Even Donald Trump agreed with that. Joe Biden came in and said, the left wants us out right now. And so we yanked everybody out. And the military, unfortunately, was lecturing us because they wanted either to get promoted or to stay in their jobs. They said, the biggest threat is climate change and white supremacy and privilege, not what was going on in Afghanistan. And when they were asked, they kept saying, it's stable. They knew it wasn't. So we had the worst military defeat in 50 years since 1975, when we left Vietnam from the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. And then we stopped pumping 2 million barrels of oil because we said, it pollutes. We're going to cut back. You frackers, you horizontal drilling, you better find another job. AOC says we won't be using oil in 10 years. Let's cancel all our pipelines. Let's cancel our contracts with Canada for imported oil. Let's stop all federal leasing of natural gas and oil on federal lands, new leases. Let's cancel ANWR. And that not only material, but psychologically told people this, when you saw all of the new regulations that were proposed, the capital gains increases, the income tax increases that were, people just said, I am not going to go frack and open, a new field and take that risk. And so gas prices went up by 30%. And natural gas are going to double this winter. And so now this administration is begging Saudi Arabia and begging Russia and begging Canada to make up the difference. We were the biggest oil and gas producer in the history of civilization. We could be in 6 months again. We were energy independent. We had the cheapest real prices of energy in a generation. And when you add then the critical racial theory that we were doing pretty well following the advice of Martin Luther King Jr., that the content of our character, not the color of our skin, is what matters. We were integrating. Black unemployment in 2019 was the lowest in history at 3.5. Latino unemployment, at 4.5. Latino unemployment was even lower. National unemployment was 3.5. So we were making progress into the dream of an integrated, assimilated, intermarried society, the only one in the history of civilization that hadn't had to use coercion, like Yugoslavia that failed or Soviet Union that failed. India doesn't do it well. Brazil doesn't do it well. We did it well. And then we reverted under the Biden to this critical race theory. So the question then is, why are they doing this? Is it because they're incompetent? They can't do it? And or is it because they're nihilistic and they thought, you know what, we're going to kind of, if I could use the term, screw things up, and then in the chaos we'll seize political power? Or is it they're angry and they feel like, well, these things don't poll well, and now Joe Biden has alienated people because he seems befuddled or addled at time or angry, get off my grass sort of idea, the way he addresses people. So he can't help the policies that he is promulgating, he hurts them. So the policies are unpopular, but he used to be at 50% popular. Now he's down to 36, and they're going like this. And maybe they're desperate. They feel that, well, that we're going to be thrown out in the midterms in a year, so let's just push this stuff. Or finally, I think this might be, your listeners might think this might be the most persuasive explanation, is they live in a bubble. And so what we in America, we just being of all political persuasions, the 55% of Americans, they think that this is a disaster. And I'm just saying they think that because the polls show they think that. But maybe Biden and the people around him think, well, the only problem is optics. We like the idea of 2 million people coming in. They're going to be constituents of the progressive parties. They're going to need immediate government help, and then we pay that at the polls. And look at Nevada, look at California, look at New Mexico, look at Georgia, Colorado. We're flipping states to Democratic blue states. And when they look at Afghanistan, they say, well, maybe the Afghan people get their country back. And it's too bad, but there's $80 billion and we didn't really need that equipment anyway. And that's no big deal. It's just a problem of public relations and optics. Or maybe they look at critical race theory and they think, well, it's time this 70% of these white races get what's coming to them. And then we're going to really push this and divide the country. And out of that division, it'll be pretty good. And class doesn't work anymore because so many people who are so-called not white are very successful. So if you keep saying that it's a horribly class discriminatory society, what do you do with Barack Obama from Martha's Vineyard, or Oprah from a $90 million house, or LeBron James? And so what they're doing is they're saying that no matter how wealthy you are, how privileged you are, how successful you are, you're still a victim because of your skin color. And they're trying to therefore say, you're always going to be with us. You get wealthy, you get successful, you might turn conservative, but no, you're always going to be a victim. Meghan Markle is a victim. LeBron James is a victim for the rest of their life. And so I think what they're saying is they like what's going on. Their only anger is that the media can't hide it anymore, and the optics are bad, and they're delusional. But I think there's going to be a big reckoning, a big reckoning. I think they're going to lose the House. I think they're going to lose the Senate. And depending on how adroit the other party is, Republicans, they'll probably lose the presidency. And I think they know that now. Finally, they know. They seem to be in a panic. And Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema, they're very canny politicians. And they would not be resisting this Democratic progressive agenda if Joe Biden was polling right now 58%. And these initiatives were polling 55%. And if they were to return to that, they would be the biggest supporters of them. But now they're saying, I can't support this president or these initiatives and go back to Arizona or go back to West Virginia and sell that, and I will be out of a job. And a lot of Congress people in the House are saying to themselves, I'm in a 50-50 district, and I got elected in 2018 with pushback against Donald Trump, but I can't be reelected because my constituents do not support this. And so that's what's happening politically now, I think.
Wow, really a very interesting perspective. And it's sort of, you answered half of my last question for you. It gives us a really good insight and look at what's happening with the Democratic Party. And we understand that their motives, I think it's probably a little bit of all of the above. There certainly has got to be some bit of recognition. I agree that they do live in quite a bubble, and perhaps some of it is just plain ignorance. But I think that they underestimate the American people. At least they're underestimating AMAC members who are just rugged individuals and have such a love for our country, a love for our flag. And when something doesn't feel right, look right, smell right, they know something's not right. But I do have this last, right. It kind of makes sense. I do have one last question. I'd love to understand your view where Trump and Trumpism, his brand of freedom, where does his fighting come from in the millions of people that embrace that? To try to understand, and do you think that what he brought about and the change that he brought about, and I think the lasting impression he left on so many Americans, how might that affect our future?
Yeah. Well, when you say Trumpism or the MAGA agenda, Make America Great agenda, there were two aspects to it. There was Trump the person, and there was Trump the agenda. And the agenda was quite brilliant because there were 16 other very capable candidates in 2016, and not one of them embraced the MAGA agenda. So he hit on something that the Republican establishment did not know about. And what was that something? It was only about 4 or 5 things. It was very simple. He said, I'm a Republican conservative. I'm going to appoint, just like you would, conservative justices. I'm for deregulation, okay, and less taxes. But then he said, we're going to close the border, and we're going to make it legal only immigration. Only enough people are going to come that we can assimilate and integrate, about 150, 200,000 a year. The days of open borders are over. Remember, Jeb Bush was saying, that's terrible. Illegal immigration is an act of love. So the Republican establishment wanted cheap labor. And that was number one. Number two, he said, everybody wants to go into Iraq or Syria or bomb Libya or go into Afghanistan, but the people who pay the price are the working classes. Their kids go over there. And now that we're energy independent, those are optional. We don't have to go in there anymore to secure. All we're going to do is secure the oil for China or the EU. Let them do it. It wasn't isolationist, because after all, he did kill Soleimani. He bombed Baghdadi and bombed ISIS out of existence. He killed 200 Russian mercenaries that attacked an American base in Syria. So it wasn't isolationist. He got tough with North Korea. He really pressed deterrence. He told all these, very hard on Putin, actually. So that was new, though, that we're not going to go over there. Then he said, I'm going to go full blast on energy, natural gas. And he said 2 things. I want to be independent so no foreign government can pressure us, and we can extract oil more environmentally safely than other people can. So what does it matter in a shared world if we don't pump oil, but Saudi Arabia pours it all over the desert, or they burn the natural gas off into the atmosphere? We can do it more cleanly and more maturely here. And that was a new idea. And then in addition to that, so there was borders, a new foreign policy. This was the key thing. He said, I believe in free trade, but only if it's fair. And our countries, after the end of World War II, that we helped Europe, Japan, Asia, it's 75 years. And the Marshall Plan is over with. And the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, we're running up these huge deficits, and they have higher tariffs on our trucks than we do on their cars. So we're going to try to tell our friends and neutrals that you have to be symmetrical on trade. And that had mixed results. And then he said to China, I'm sorry, but the myth in the West that the more that we enabled you, the more that we said you can have patent infringement, copyright theft, dumping, running up big surpluses, currency manipulation, the better you will be, the more wealthy you will be, the more sophisticated, and the more democratic you will finally be. You'll be just like, he said, I don't believe that. I think you're going to use all this money and profit and build a big military, and you'll be our rival. So we're going to treat you fairly, but we're not going to give in anymore. And when he did that, it just sent a bolt through that red interior I was talking about. And 7 or 8 million people who had not voted for Mitt Romney or John McCain came out and voted. And that's why he won the Electoral College. So when he did it again, then we get to the person very quickly. And that was different because people said, it's not just the agenda, but Donald Trump does not want to lose nobly anymore. He does not want to lose like McCain did or Romney did. We want to win if we have to ugly. We remember Lee Atwater, who won George H.W. Bush. When they went after him, he hit back with the Boston Harbor, the tank ad, the Willie Horton ad. So Donald Trump was angry. He could be crude. He could take on his enemies. And people said, that's what we need. He may be an attack dog, but we'll cut the leash and let him go do to the left what they're doing to us. Okay, so then that got the left angry, and they obsessed. We had the Russian collusion hoax with 2 impeachments, anonymous. It just was a 360-degree attack on it. And now where are we? I think everybody in the Republican Party and even the independents agree that that agenda in terms of unemployment, GDP, national security, energy efficiency, and independence was very successful. When you get to, and then Donald Trump, I would say, in the Republican Party, 75% like the idea that he could bring out huge crowds, give it back to the left. But it did seem that in that process, either the left was successful in demonizing, or either he went down dead ends or cul-de-sacs with his tweets. I don't know the answer, but he lost the majority of independent voters. And that meant that the Never Trumpers, that were only 7% of the Republican Party, they played a role. So in this last election in the Electoral College, Donald Trump lost by about 80,000 key votes. Had he had enough of those, either of those groups, then he couldn't get it. So what does this mean now as we look at the future? I'd say about 60% of the Republican Party says, let's nominate Trump again. He had the agenda, he's got smarter. He'll give them hell. I like the person, and then the another 40% say something like this. Well, let's insist that all the candidates follow that agenda. Let's not go back to, appeasing China or open borders or writing off the red interior. However, they say, I'm exhausted. I can't take any longer. I don't want to go into a war with the left again. We got to get mad, but we got to get smarter. So we need a MAGA advocate, but who understands how you get even with the left rather than just antagonize them. And so they're looking at somebody like Governor DeSantis, and they think he will fight, but he will carry the agenda. And I don't know how it's going to work. I have mixed emotions about both theories, and I'm not going to endorse or advocate either one, but I think that's where we are. And I think the left is more scared of a guy like DeSantis now because they don't know what to do with him. He doesn't have they don't know him enough. On the other side, I think people have said to me, and maybe you and some of your people, well, we said the same thing about Governor Scott Walker. He was a brilliant governor in a purple state. He knew how to deal with the left. He took on the unions. We were all for him, and then he fizzled out on the campaign debate stage. Maybe DeSantis, when he hits the rubber meets the road, he'll do that. So we're in an age of uncertainty, but not uncertainty about the agenda. Everybody agrees that created a new workers, nationalist, populist, middle-class Republican Party. And when you look at income by zip code or by congressional district, overwhelmingly, the people who are in the lower middle class, the middle class, and the upper middle class now, for the first time, vote Republican. And the Democratic Party is the party of the very, very wealthy and the very, very subsidized poor. And so that's a revolution. It's a revolution.
Yeah, it sure is. And I do pray for that day of reckoning. I do think that it's forthcoming. I also have never seen such a stark difference between two leaders. You look at Trump, you look at Biden back to back. It's just unbelievable and how different our nation looks today than it did just a short year ago.
I know.
Really interesting. Yeah, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. You are just really a wonderful source of light and real depth. And I do want to conclude with one open-ended question. Talk a little bit, maybe borrow on your recent book. If you were looking at the far horizon and thinking aloud about what worries you most and how we might get ahead of it, what issue would come to the top of your concern list, if we haven't covered it yet?
Yes. Well, what I'm worried about is not just specific to the United States, but to Canada, to Western Europe, to Australia, the former British Commonwealth. And that's something that people throughout antiquity to the present have worried about. And that is that when you combine technology, Western capitalism, the Enlightenment, and free market capitalism, all the wonderful things that make us so prosperous, and you put that into an environment of democracy and freedom, then what happens is the citizens, after the depressions are over, the wars are over, the existential struggles are over, then they want to satisfy their appetites, or they look at life as, I got to get the next cell phone, or I got to get a bigger house. I think that's great, but my problem is that uh, they feel that they have to be perfect to be good, or that they have to be ideal. So they have no tolerance for anybody in the past or future. They tear down statues. They rename names. They change the logo on buildings. They cancel people, and and then they don't feel that they have to contribute to society. The world is so wonderful that they can communicate. They can go onto TikTok. They don't feel that there's any restraint on them. In the old days, so throughout history, people said, if you're going to go down this Western route, you got to be very careful, because when you start to get very, very successful in Athens or Rome or 15th century Renaissance Florence or 19th century Europe or 21st century America, you've got to reinvest in your community, your church, your parents, your grandparents, the traditions of your family. You have to make sure you don't shame them. In other words, just because it's legal and it's possible to do something, you don't mean you can do it. You have to have some kind of restraint and public service, and I think that our society is just wild now, that you turn on television, or I mean, we are being told that if a person wants to be transgender, then that is a norm. It's no different than male heterosexuality or female binaries. And if you don't believe that, then you're a horrible person. And that intolerance, or that quest that we're going to get a theoretical perfection and we're going to force it down on you, or we know that there's global warming, it's caused by carbon emission, it was because of gas and oil, we don't care what it costs, we're going to end it right now, even if we destroy people's lives. And rather than saying, let's be empirical and see what degree women are responsible for it, what degree it's natural, what degree we're in a cycle, and then let's gradually transition to, if that proves empirically correct, to a less carbon fuel without destroying our lives. But there's this excess, and it comes from all of this freedom and prosperity, and you can see it. I mean, as I said earlier, when you're only producing 1.7 persons per family, you're not replacing yourself. And when people are not marrying and they're not having children, and that's everybody's gift to do what they want. But when you say it's the norm, as AOC said, not to have children, and people are saying it's no different not to marry than to marry, it is different. And so individual choice is wonderful, but at some point we have to ask ourselves, where did we come from? And who were the guys that died on Okinawa? Who were the guys that died on Normandy? Who were the guys that went through the Depression? Who were the guys that built this country in the 19th century? And they had a very different outlook, a tragic outlook on life. And they said, life is very tough, and I got to survive one more day. And I'd like to be utopian, but I can't afford it. I have one kid that got typhoid. I've got another one that has polio. I've got a bad arm. I'm going to probably die at 60 if I'm lucky. And that type of tragic existence is what built this country. And we don't want to return to it. It was so brutal, but we have to acknowledge what great people these were and not to let them down. We're letting them down.
Oh, we sure are, especially if we try to erase our history, erase the things that we know of our past. And for me personally, I do think that God plays a or belief in God, and understanding that we are afforded these inalienable rights, that they come from our Creator. And that's really what the founding fathers believed. And those were rights that a government did not give to you. And so they couldn't take them from you. And I do think that as our nation sort of moves away from faith, it seems, I saw recent numbers that there are fewer people that are a member of a church or a member of a church community. Here in America, the numbers are slipping, and I know COVID hasn't helped that much, but there's an attempt to really remove any sense of God from our schools and all of our institutions, and this moving away from what I think can lay a really wonderful, strong foundation for our youth, and that comes from the home. So. Yeah. I just cannot thank you enough, Dr. Hanson. You have been a real eye-opener for me and for all of us, and your insights and your historical perspectives are so unique and really appreciated. So thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to your books and your most recent book, and hearing from you in many venues with great gratitude. Thank you again for all you do for us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Excellent. And to everyone listening out there, thank you for joining AMAC's podcast, Better for America. Until then, thank you for joining. And I also want to thank our members for tuning in and sharing this podcast. If you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, you can watch and listen to today's podcast, plus track breaking news here. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow, like, and share whenever you're on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.